Railway. I do have a couple other CP team members that are in the room. So Greta, if you want to stand up, and Jennifer, if you want to stand up. Greta's with Public Works. Jennifer's with our Industrial Development and Customer Service. So wide variety of different questions and answers we can accommodate from you. Obviously, maybe not during the CPKC part, but during any networking components or towards the end of the day. So again, I represent Canadian Pacific Railway. We're a railroad that was founded on precision and we think is built for growth right now. Our precision scheduled railroading model has really transformed over the 12 years we've been operating. Our PSR has really transformed the way our company operates. And we are humbly and hungrily ready to take that model to the North American continent as a whole. So I think probably the main reason you are all here is to discuss Holiday Train. So as you may know, the Canadian Pacific Holiday Train will return to the rails this season on its first transcontinental tour its first time in the last 3 years. And since Holiday Train program launched in 1999, it's raised now more than $21 million and collected 5 million pounds of food for community food banks across North America. So with that, CP, let me give you a brief overview of CP as a railroad. So CP was founded in 1881. We provide competitive access to key markets in Canada and across the U.S., with main access to major ports on the West Coast and the East Coast. We have the shortest routes and key lanes between Vancouver and the U.S. Midwest, Chicago and Detroit mainly, as well as between Eastern Canada and Calgary and Vancouver. You can, as potential shippers, access the network through over 100 transload facilities, which extends our service reach beyond that direct access to rail. In the United States, we own and operate over 5,100 miles of track and employ 3,000 dedicated railroaders. Our major rail operations in the U.S. are in Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, Mason City, and Davenport, Iowa. We also, just again, give you sort of a brief overview here. Some people don't know, but we also own 49% of the Indiana Harbor Belt Railroad and are a part owner of the Belt Railroad Company of Chicago. So large presence in Chicago with our operations there. Our Eastern Corridor also supports our market position at the Port of Montreal, which provides one of the shortest direct rail routes for European cargo destined to the U.S. Midwest. And as some of you may know, our acquisition of the CMQ in New Brunswick and in Maine, which was finalized last year, provides access to the Port of St. John and the Port of Searsport, Maine. And if you've been following it, the port activity at the Port of St. John is blowing our expectations out of the water. So it's a great news story and one that we look forward to building on even more. So how are we going to build on that even more? Well, you may be aware of a small railroad merger that's going through the federal regulatory process in DC, but I would encourage you to go to futureforfreight.com, which has a lot of dedicated information papers. You can see the full list of Wisconsinite organizations that signed up in support of it and get much more detailed information there. But with that being said, I also just want to give you a brief overview of Kansas City Southern. So Kansas City Southern was founded in 1887. It is a transportation holding company that really has two primary subsidiaries. It has Kansas City Southern Railway Company, which is one of the 7 Class I railroads that operate in the United States. They also have an extensive rail network in Mexico with the Kansas City Southern de Mexico, which is one of the 2 largest regional railroads in Mexico. They have direct access to several short lines, transload, intermodal facilities, and energy terminals across Mexico, with direct access to key ports, Mexican automotive manufacturing, and of course, trans-border connections with the U.S. So with that being said, what makes CPKC, if not the perfect rail merger, the most ideal rail merger that this country has experienced and will ever experience in the future? Well, it's really that it is a vertical merger. It is not a horizontal merger. So if you've been following DC transportation speak, what does that mean? That means that there are no cross lines, there are no parallel lines between what KCS operates and what CP operates. One of the key questions that was asked during the last quarterly earnings call of Mr. Keith Creel was, man, that first month is probably going to be rough, right? Assuming STB approval, that the merger goes through and you're going to have to figure out all these train crossovers and everything. And if you look at the map, Mr. Creel's answer was, well, there's no train crossovers. That's the point, that we meet in one place in Kansas City, where we already hand off traffic. And what's going to cease is we will no longer be handing off traffic in Kansas City. We will have, among other things, and again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this. I'm sure you got questions on it. Part of it is fresh new train starts that will occur in Bensenville and in St. Paul, and we'll go all the way down to Shreveport and then on into Mexico daily. You also have those fresh train starts occurring from Davenport, so Davenport, St. Paul, and Chicago, direct mainline service twice a day, and then reverse coming from those locations back into those northern hubs as well. It's also going to be the first railroad, as you can clearly see on the map, that crosses all three countries and links all three countries together. So the first time you'll have a Canadian, US, and Mexican railroad, again, with streamless connections between all three. Part of it is going to be, we will be that first three-country railroad, but we will also join the ranks of the coast to coast to coast, and maybe even to coast railroad as part of that. So we're going to link the port of Vancouver with the Midwest. You'll have the port of St. John to the Midwest that CP already provides, but now you're going to bring that direct service from those Gulf ports straight into the Midwest. And then you're also going to have the port of Cardenas, which is on the West Coast port of Mexico, which will provide you direct access to the United States, the Midwest, as well as part of that. So in partnership with KCS, we're already, I think, on about our fourth trial intermodal service, direct from that port to Chicago. We've found that basically, although it takes a little bit longer land distance-wise to get there, there is not the holdup at the port to unload the ship. So the ship can pull right into the port of Cardenas, be offloaded immediately, go right on that intermodal train, and be released to go right to Chicago, which makes you completely competitive with the port of Long Beach. So Cardenas is never going to replace the port of Long Beach, but we think it does provide another real shipping option for those freighter services that come into the West Coast that say, you know what, I normally send, I'm totally making this up, but I normally send 10 ships to the port of Long Beach. Maybe I'm going to take one of those and send those to Cardenas or some version of that. We think we can open that up for folks along the network. Of course, the other part of this is we are a railroad that believes in free trade. And we think the fact that USMCA was passed provides a unique opportunity for this continent to compete with competitors overseas, particularly some on the Asia Pacific area that you might be aware of, and will really strengthen the North American economy as part of that. So let me go, again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I do want to go through the numbers on some of this. I guess I actually should say part of it too, you probably have Wisconsin specific questions about this. So there is no projected increase in the number of trains that will come through Wisconsin as part of it. There is a slight increase the amount of tonnage that we believe the trains that come through Wisconsin will haul, but it's really pretty slight. And we do forecast adding 3 additional car mechanical positions in Wisconsin as part of that. Also probably of interest to folks that are in the audience, we also think there's going to be about an 85,700 truck mile reduction in Wisconsin as part of the merger. That's primarily on your interstate and state highways on the western side of Wisconsin. You can think about those areas that bleed over to the Twin Cities area. That's where you'll see that reduction in truck miles that is there as part of that. All right, so going through a couple things that you have on the screen. This is going to be fundamentally better for the environment. And what do I mean by that? I really have 3 things that kind of come to mind with this. Really what makes CPKC work from an economic standpoint is 2 things. It's providing that one-on-one, head-to-head competition with our other Class 1 railroads that already provide service to Mexico. Mainly you can think of UP and BNSF coming out of Chicago. Those are the folks we can go head-to-head with. So some of it will be taking rail traffic and competing with rail traffic from them, thinking we can provide a better service to those customers. So some of it is rail to rail diversion, but honestly, a huge part of it is truck to rail diversion. Annually, there are about 64,000 trucks a day that are commuting from the Midwest, so Detroit, Chicago area, to Mexico. We think those 64,000 trucks a day are prime for rail diversion. So you're going to see a huge environmental benefit from that. A lot of that, again, is laid out in the merger application. We actually have some great maps on it that are on the website that show you the individual highways that we think will be improved on that. But the other part I want to hit on is some of the technological innovation that's environmentally friendly that CP is already working on. So as you may know, CP does haul some Canadian crude by rail so mainly from Western Canada down to Port Arthur in the Gulf. About a couple years ago, we developed in partnership with one of our shippers something called ver2, which removes the hazardous component, the flammable, the combustible component from crude by rail. So we actually can take that off, put the remainder of the dill bit into the tank car, and move that as a non-hazardous product through the U.S. network to the Gulf port and unload it there. It means it doesn't have to move as crude by rail. You think of it with the hazmat placards and everything on it because it is non-combustible. That partnership has grown to the fact that now about 60% of the crude by rail that we move is now ver2 and is in its non-hazardous form. So as we expand that connection to other Gulf port oil terminals, we think there's an avenue there for us to expand that partnership and, again, be safer for the environment and be safer for the communities that we move through. The other part would be, and again, I don't know how much of this you've all followed, but all of the Class 1 railroads are doing tremendous work and moving towards removing diesel fuel as the primary fuel that fuels the rail network. The primary or the primary technological innovation that CP has pegged ourselves on is hydrogen. So we've had some great success with hydrogen and some partnerships we've had with the province of Alberta, where we partnered on some grant applications, and we first said, okay, can you put a hydrogen fuel cell and power system in a locomotive? We have figured that out. So check that box. We got that done a couple years ago. And then what we started doing last year was actually putting now 3 locomotives that are hydrogen powered into mainline revenue service and trying them out on the network. How well does it work in Western Canada environmental? How much horsepower can you get on it? Figuring all of that out. We have been blown away by the success that is coming from that, and we're very hopeful and think we can move forward with this pretty dramatically. But my point of what does that mean for CPKC? Many of you that have followed hydrogen may know that the leader in the U.S. for hydrogen power development is Houston, which is where our network's going to go through. So there is a good opportunity to take some of the groundwork that we've laid in Alberta, match that so some of the work that we're doing or that the Houston area is doing on making a hydrogen hub there, and then patch in some other areas. As some of you maybe know, they're from the Chicagoland area. The Biden administration is working with several folks in the Chicagoland area to build a hydrogen power center there. So there's just a lot of some symmetry aspects that are very possible with that. I hit on a little bit of the innovation and safety component as part of that. One thing I do want to talk about is CP enjoys a fantastic relationship with Amtrak, and as some of you may know, Amtrak is a supporter of the CP-KC merger. I think as many of you probably know, CP now has gone 6 years as getting a grade A from Amtrak for our on-time performance with them, and you sit in an area that has that best on-time performance. So the Hiawatha across all of the Amtrak services anywhere in the United States has the best on-time performance. So not only is there that, there's one, but we also have number 3 on the list with the Ethan Allen Express up the Northeast as well. So some of the work that I know WSDOT is heavily involved in and MnDOT is heavily involved in isn't necessarily tied to the merger. This is really things that we're doing outside of it, but we believe that the merger really, through the redirection of some of that freight traffic, does open up some corridors, particularly in Minnesota and Wisconsin and north of Chicago, for some increased passenger aerial access as well. So we thank our Amtrak partners as part of that. Look forward to growing that relationship. You'll see some other things that are down in the south where we're exploring potentially Amtrak service between Baton Rouge and New Orleans that is directly related to part of the merger. So stay tuned for all of that. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that for 16 years running now, CP has the best safety record of any of the Class 1 railroads. You will note from some of the discussions you may have heard in DC about what does PSR mean for safety, that record of safety performance predated PSR, and we've kept it through our growth with PSR. So I don't think there's a direct connection between being a PSR railroad and any of those rumors about being unsafe as part of that. So we need to make that point. And I would also say in the quarter that we just came through, CP had its best safety record in our whole history from 1887. Least amount of train accidents, least amount of employee injuries. So we're very proud of that fact and proud of the direction that we're headed as a railroad and look to expanding that precedent and that operating standard to a CP-KC network. So the last part on it, one of the things I would say is when you think about the CPKC network and the markets that are going to be served, it's really three main commodities, if I can roll this into a very broad statement, that are going to be positively impacted by the merger. It's really an automotive play. So right now, CP has one of the smallest, if not the smallest, connection to automobile manufacturers in North America. Pending STB approval, if CPKC goes through, we will have one of the largest automotive franchises of all the Class 1 railroads. And again, you think about automobile manufacturing that happens in Eastern Canada in the Ontario area, matched to Midwest manufacturing, matched to manufacturing and parts in Mexico, and you link all those three together in a single interline service for a railroad, and it's a pretty magical connection as part of it. The other part of it is intermodal. So again, like I said, there is no direct intermodal link between, well, there are two direct intermodal links between the Chicagoland area and Mexico. So again, that's UP and BNSF. So we will compete on those routes as well. But there isn't that direct interline service between Detroit and Dallas, or Detroit and Mexico, which we could then provide as part of this. And again, that direct link between Chicago and Dallas also doesn't exist at the moment on intermodal service. So those are all benefits we can provide to the market. And then the last part is ag manufacturing, agricultural product manufacturing. There probably is no single state in the country, it was brought up from the FRA beforehand, that's going to benefit from this more than the state of Iowa. There's a huge hunger for Iowa ag products in Mexico, particularly for feedstock. And the fact that we can now take those Iowa products on a single line haul and move those all the way from eastern Iowa directly to Mexico is a game changer. There's a lot of ag producers in southeast Iowa that for years have put off investment in their area because rail was not really a big viable option for them because they were on the CP network, and it was a very short haul move from southeastern Iowa to Kansas City was where we went, right? But if you now eliminate Kansas City as a connection and we can provide direct interline service from those ag producers straight to Mexico on a unit train, they've already said, pending STB approval, if it goes through, we're going to make massive investments in southeastern Iowa and add jobs and grow that productivity. One other thing I would add on this, and then I think I'm close to being done here for your questions, is I think a lot of times when you think about mergers in the United States, you think of two things. There's that we got to shrink margins, so we're going to cut CapEx, and we're going to find better efficiency through cutting jobs, right? So two of the main components of the CPKC merger will be job creation and will be massive investment in the network. So we're looking to hire, not cut, but add 1,100 new railroaders across the network. I mentioned 3 of them will come to Wisconsin, but particularly if you're the communities in Shreveport, Louisiana, if you're in Davenport, Iowa, there's going to be 3-figure job increases there. Not, well, that figure too, but hundreds of extra job creation for railroaders in those area. And then if you think about the CPKC network going back from southern Minnesota straight through Iowa, Missouri, and down south, CPKC is going to invest $275 million in that area and increasing track maintenance, building new sidings, extending current sidings, putting CTC on several parts of that network, which never warranted before because of how low traffic was, but now with the increase in traffic will warrant that renewed investment in the U.S. rail network, and investment in infrastructure is something that's good for all of us. So with that, I will finally pause and shut up and see if you guys have any questions or anything for me.
On grain, you talk about grain products, but on grains, bulk grains, do you think CPKC will compete for volumes moving to the Gulf export volumes that was all from other carriers?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the other part you may have heard of is the Mississippi River, right? Is not at the water level that we're accustomed to. And I think that's providing some potential opportunities as well for some shippers to think again about the whole theme of the last 3 or 4 years, right, is diversifying everything you do and making sure you're not relying on one mode of transportation, one set of suppliers, whatever that case may be. So not only is it a yes to your question, but I think it's also competing with other modes. And again, not that we would take over wholesale something, but just folks that want to hedge their bets a little bit and say, hey, I want to make sure this option is here and available, will come to CPKC and explore what that looks like. And in Iowa, it's also about DDGs, it's about ethanol, it's about soybean, and it's about corn. It's everything under the sun there. So.